My name is Kycell, and right now, I have to save my friend and my closest source for information on the Forgoten Minotaur King. I ran from my hiding place behind the building adjacent to Kyne's mayoral home. The sight of such a powerful warrior that I've been growing a friendship with these last few days, reduced to a bloody heap, was enough to make my heart skip a beat. I knelt by his side and put my ear to his chest, carefully avoiding the horn protruding from his chest. That, despite my lack of real medical knowledge, I was certain had pierced a lung at the very least. I stepped back, not fully sure, but certain I heard something. I wasn't confident what the correct procedure would be next. If I should leave him face down on the grass in the front yard, or roll him over to get a better look at his wound. That was when I remembered, prior to his fight with that evil creature Fugazi, he had ordered the innkeeper that was attacked to be taken to the kingdom's medical center, meaning there would be facilities built to properly aid Kind. That was all dependent on whether I could hear breathing or heartbeat. I chose to leave him as he was, and perhaps find a neighbor with a better clue as to what to do first. That was when I remembered my bag of scrolls. I'd taken them from the rubble in the inn before following Kind, fortunately despite his orders to the contrary. Dumping my bag on the ground, I leafed through the available spell scrolls. Passing ones I recently deduced were for generating sunlight, mildly changing one's appearance, and even the one I had used in the forest in a useless attempt to save Dar and Myrink from the ogre's mount that simply produced a cloud of rain. Finally, and with immeasurable fortune, I found one I had labeled in common for stabilization. While not a healing spell, which would take actual magical talent to manifest, this one could temporarily stave off death for someone on the brink. Sticking with my decision not to jostle or move Kind in his current state, I just took the scroll and, with my empty hand in the recommended somatic position, spoke the words, "Ne mange umrejeti," while the image of a beating heart was clear in my mind. And I knelt by Kind's side. This time, I could definitely hear shallow breathing, and even mild puffs of dirt pluming from his nostrils. I knew I'd have to rush if I was to help him survive. I got up and began to run door to door. The first door I approached was the brick building I had been hiding behind during Kyne's encounter with the Rijalisad's gang. I pounded on the large oaken door, but no one came. I then headed for the first house in the direction Kyne's son and babysitter had approached from. After hammering the door, a small, elderly woman, human, came to the door.
Why, hello. Are you selling something, young man? I don't have any coins on me.
I shouted for directions to the nearest medical center, and she told me the Palamedes Medical School was just a few blocks west of here, and that was where her niece was planning to attend in the fall. I turned to leave as she began to ask if I was a traveling apothecary selling health drugs. I now knew the where, but how was still an issue. I doubted the elderly woman who told me of the medical school was in any shape to help me lift an enormous Minotaur-like Kind, especially not to carry him several blocks. Fortunately, Enough time must have passed, and the commotion of Kind's battle with the two ogres and the orc guard must have piqued the citizenry's curiosity. Looking down the street, I began to see a few doors open and a few heads poke from the frames. My heart was filling with relief. I began to shout for help to any one of them willing. A few humans and dwarven men and women heeded my call and approached. I ushered them to Kind, where many produced shocked gasps at his current state. I assured them I had stabilized him, but he sustained a lot of injuries, and if they wanted their mare to live, they would need to help me to move him to the medical school as soon as possible. Thank the gods they obliged and helped. Some lifted his arms, careful not to jostle the exposed bones on his right, or his broken wrist on the left. Light but audible pained grunts escaped Kind's mouth, but I found them welcoming, as they meant he was still with us, at least for the time being. I walked with the group, passing block after block of housing, until I finally saw the medical center. The irony of my university-led quest bringing me to another for aid wasn't lost on me. The large and sanctuarious building reminded me quite a bit of Sigwardi's University back in Wolfkeep. As my large group and I closed the distance with the center, many students and advisors began to approach. Some medical technicians in training drew Kind from the layman citizens and placed him onto a wheeled and cushioned pallet so that he could be transported more safely. As the residents stayed behind, or else began to return home, I stuck with Kind and the medical students as they wheeled him into the school. While the outside of the medical university reminded me of my own, inside it was pristinely clean. The area they took us through had walls that looked like they were made of some sort of ceramic porcelain-like material that shined a bright white. A shaggy, black and white furred, canine-headed Rougarou student with a chart hastened in step with me and the students pushing the pallet.
Oh my god, is that the mayor? What gone his condition, seen?
I told her he was defending his house and son from goons the Rijalisad moving into the castle had sent. They broke his arm, shattered his wrist, stabbed him in the shoulder, broken his teeth and probably his jaw, broke his horn, and stabbed him in the chest. After listing all the horrible things I had witnessed, the full weight of the attack finally landed on me. I hadn't had time to process how brutal it was, and I hesitated to mention it was all one man, if you could even call that monster a man. The bright wolfen eyes of the Rougarou student widened in shock at all the injuries he had sustained.
How him go and survive all that?
I then explained I used a stabilization spell to get him this far along, but that was the best I could do. She nodded her head knowingly, then asked my relation to the mayor. I told her I was interviewing him extensively for a book I was writing for my university. She again nodded understandingly and filled out the chart she had been carrying. This strongly reminded me of the dutiful and concentrated way my friend and stenographer on this journey, Ahani Rau, took notation, and how I needed to make sure her and Myrink were still safe after I was done seeing to Kind. As we finally wheeled into an enormous room, walled off with a curtain down the middle, I hadn't noticed until now, but the two technicians that were handling the pallet had their free hands waving over Kyne's limbs and torso, their palms giving off a dull yellow light. I figured it must have been a more practiced version of the stabilization spell I had used the scroll to cast, as Kyne was looking better and better.
What is going on in here? We do not have any simulated emergency courses today, since all of the faculty are up at the castle.
To my surprise, the curtain closing off Kyne's pallet to the rest of the room was suddenly drawn back, and in the space beyond was a very stout, pink-scaled lamia. Her head was hooded like a human-sized cobra, with the wide frill replacing where mammalian humanoids had hair. She wore a physician's robe over her shoulders and crossed arms, and her entirely snake-like lower half rhythmically swayed as she saw the mayor of Goldenrod beaten to a pulp in her classroom, and laying in what I would assume was her operating table. The Rougarou student addressed her as Psycha. She then began to go on about how this was a big opportunity for them. I was now beginning to grow confused. I noticed a concerned and then contemplative look cross this Psycha's face. Finally, her bright blue and only slightly serpentine eyes turned to excitement.
You are the writer, yes? You brought the mayor here? You did a good job, but we can handle it from this point on.
Now it was my turn to be surprised, but if this Psycha woman, whose physician's robes addressed her as Dr. Silibin, said that they had this under control, who was I to argue? I thanked them profusely and left them to their work. I needed to get back to Myrink and Ahani before that Fugazi and his thugs found them too. I highly doubted the innkeeper that exposed Kyne had left out their roles in the kidnapping of their subordinate. As I ran from the examination section of the room, passing the citizens that had helped me bring Kyne to these facilities, I offered them profuse thanks. Then, telling them Kyne was in good hands, I made my way out of the city. Past the golden flowers that bordered the town, and over the hill, I had finally reached the entrance to the catacombs, only to see Myrink, Ahani, and the young orc were nowhere in sight. I began to panic, expecting the worst, but then I remembered Kyne had told them to wait in the tomb with the Vigabane undead. I ran into the cavern and down the steep steps until I came to the torchlit doorway, and, much to my relief, there were the incredibly bored-looking pair of my party members, and a still bound but loudly snoring, pock-faced orc youth.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell Bakshi, along with all the additional voices in the Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.